Hi, Melissa Chaudhry here, greetings of peace. I want to talk to you about something I just found out. So the House Armed Services Committee just passed an authorization. The selective service, the draft, here in America is now going to be done automatically. Just a straight up automatic registration for every male in the country, both citizen and non-citizen, between the ages of 18 and 26. The Senate is currently considering its own version of the National Defense Authorization Act for this year, which includes a similar provision, but rather than automating the draft, it expands it to include women too, of the same age bracket. Both of these are terrible ideas, and I'm calling it out in part because Adam Smith is ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, and this was a Democratic amendment that was put forward in that committee before it made it out to the full House vote for approval. America is currently engaging in brinksmanship across multiple theaters all around the world. We are pushing towards war, unfortunately, with China and with Russia, and of course we are arming Israel to the teeth against people who have glorified fireworks to fight back. What this would do, what automating this draft does, is on the one hand, sure, it makes it very efficient to sign up millions and millions of young Americans without their consent to go be sent to fight and die in foreign wars. That's the efficiency argument. What it also does is it removes the right to the freedom of conscience. It removes the ability for someone to choose to engage in civil disobedience by not registering for what is at heart something that violates personal autonomy and freedom of choice. The fact that we have an all-volunteer military right now means that we trust our country, we trust our people to know when it is time to fight and to step up. That is a strength. That is not a sign of weakness. What this would do is remove the ability for someone to just simply say, I want peace. I won't go kill. I won't go die. Let me serve in other ways. A personal story. Used to be, earlier on in the selective service system, which has been in place for decades, which was originally from the draft in Vietnam, which tore the country apart, by the way, and moving closer towards implementing a draft again is likely to tear apart a country again. Terrible idea. Used to be, when you registered for the selective service, there was a box, a checkbox on that form that said, I intend to apply for conscientious objector status. Now, for those who might not be familiar, a conscientious objector is someone who goes through an authorization process later on saying, due to deeply held personal beliefs, religious or spiritual or reason and conscience, I will not serve in war. Please, yes, let me serve in other ways. Let me go plant trees and teach children and be a part of supporting my country in other ways, but I am not registering for war, I am registering for service. Checking the box doesn't automatically grant conscientious objector status, but it was a way to say up front, I'm not signing up for violence, that's not what I'm here for. I knew a young man in high school, his name was Toby. He and his family were Quakers, so they believed deeply in peace and nonviolence. After that checkbox on that form was removed, his father sued the US government to put it back on, saying we need this way to express our freedom of choice and conscience, otherwise we cannot in good conscience register for the draft. If you don't register, you don't get federal student aid. In 40 states you cannot get a driver's license, and you're excluded from government jobs. So it creates an inequality, for sure. His father aged out past the age of 27, and the US government said, oh, you don't have standing anymore, you can't continue this case. So his son, Toby, to his credit, picked up that case as soon as he could and was carrying it forward. I was going to high school at Central Kitsap over in Silverdale, Washington, across the water from Seattle, and I brought Toby in to speak. And that was significant because that's a very military-heavy area. We've got Naval Hospital Bremerton right there, Bangor Sub Base, one of the biggest nexuses of military nuclear weapons and submarine capabilities in the world, actually. If Kitsap County, that little county, seceded from the United States, it would be the 7th most powerful nuclear force on the planet, just by its own little lonesome. So that's where I went to high school. And those were the kids I was going to high school with, families of military, just like I was. My father was Navy, the doctor at the Naval Hospital Bremerton, up to a high rank. So I brought Toby into our high school and filled the library with people to hear his talk for multiple class periods through the whole day. And he broke it down for us. He said, in World War I, there was a 90% failure to fire rate. That meant that of the soldiers who got recruited, 17, 18, 19-year-old boys, trained, supposedly, had a gun put in their hands, were thrown out to the front lines, a full 90% would hold that gun up and look across the field and not pull the trigger. He told stories of the soldiers going to their commanding officers and saying, "Sir, don't you realize those are people? Those are people." Military training has advanced since then, and not necessarily in a good way. Now, the targets that they train young soldiers with are not concentric circles of red and white. Now they are shaped like human bodies, or even more so the video games, the many things we have that desensitize us to the impact of actually taking another human life. I mean that the failure to fire rate is now much lower than it used to be. But he was making the point that at a fundamental level, we are all humans. The shared sense of humanity is intrinsic to our being. It is not something that can be taken lightly. It is not something that should be trained out of us. And it's certainly not something that should be tamped down, suppressed, in order for our labor, our love, our own very own souls to be exploited for the empire to fight other empires. The vote on the House Armed Services Committee to add this democratic amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act was a voice vote. In case you're not familiar with what that means, a voice vote is when they don't write down who voted what way. There's no electronic record that is attached to each congressperson's voting record. Instead, it's just simple, out into the moment of the room, ayes, nays, and that's it. There's no record. We don't know who voted what way, and we never will. So anytime you hear that there's been a voice vote on something, know this and rest assured that the folks who are doing it are pretty clear that they're doing something wrong, or at least something very unpopular, and they don't want to be held to account for it. Keep that in mind, okay? I'll wrap this up now, but I wanted to let you know that this just happened. On the one hand, the Senate is considering expanding the draft to include women. On the other hand, the House now has approved a version of the National Defense Authorization Act that would make registration automatic and mean that you cannot engage in civil disobedience, you cannot choose not to register for the draft anymore. I'll let you decide what you think about that. Thank you so much for joining me today.